So we have 3 minutes before we're slated to get started, but I'll go ahead and get started because this presentation actually, and our conversation will likely go over. We'll need all the time we can get. So I'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Engage session. I'm really excited to be here with you all. And so today, yes, we're going to be talking about how to teach people how to save the world. So with that huge lofty goal, we're going to start really at the foundational level, which is how do you engage your students or your community, your clients, the folks that you work with, people, right, to get involved. So to that end, I'm going to start with introductions, just because I like to know who I'm speaking with, who's in the room. I'll share a little bit about my background, and then we'll talk about what does it mean to engage people, okay? I'm hoping we'll be able to run through a First Amendment simulation, and it'll make sense in a little bit why we're doing First Amendment as opposed to other topics? Off. Okay.
Silent.
Okay, so if you can turn your phones off or put it on silent or vibrate, that would be helpful. And then you know what, at the end I have some time reserved for questions and answers, but I want this to be a very conversational presentation, so consider myself more as a facilitator of conversation and less as a presenter. Right, so we'll have time throughout the presentation for you guys to give your thoughts, share your experiences and whatnot. So first, let's start with who you are. Okay, so I'd like to know who's in the room. So if you could just identify your name, what your role is here at AU, maybe a little bit about the population of students or people you interact with, and a little bit about what does engage mean for you. So who would like to go first? Okay.
My name is Laura Shane. I'm a professor in the School of Communication and an alumni from many years ago that we shouldn't count. I teach a variety of classes. One of the classes where I'm excited about this content is Communication in Society, and where communication interacts with society and drives changes in society, and of course how society affects our communication. And I also teach communication strategy. And there's a lot of advocacy components to that, and I just spot like-minded advocates and kind of help them along the journeys of the changes that they want to seek. So that's why I chose this session. And then engage means to me, the ability to motivate people, interact with them, to drive a meaningful change.
Great.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm nice. Hi, my name is Beth, and I teach Spanish. So the population of the students, and why I'm exactly here, because my students usually, most of them are from the SIS, and they're all doing a lot of work with the United Nations, government here and there. And when we discuss everything that we discuss in class, and I see those brilliant ideas, I often ask, in the end, when someone is making politics, why don't we see those smart ideas over there? So probably it's for me to help them when they're becoming someone to do what they dream, or just as a topic of conversation, to change, really, to make some changes.
Yeah, that's great.
And, starting right now, because it's quite helpful.
Exactly. We're such a globalized world now where we interact with people from all over, and we share, we can learn from one another. So I think that's fantastic that you're here. Thank you. Who else? Okay.
Hi, I'm Celeste. I am a faculty member in the Department of Health Studies. So I teach a broad range of students from both students who are majors in our department as well as my classes are gen ed as well. And I also have a first year class, which is one of the core classes, Food Justice Matters. I come to pedagogy as an activist, and so I often bring that into the classroom, and so I'm often thinking about how to, in health studies and in public health, we are advocates always. And what does that mean to the students to be a mindful advocate and to be present with the communities that they're working with?
I'm going to come back to a couple of points you raised. Great, nice to meet you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Catherine Reagan. I'm
actually a reference librarian. I don't teach exactly. And so I interact with all kinds of students from the law school but what we're trying to do at the library is to have the library seen as kind of a hub for civic engagement. And we had a big initiative for National Voter Registration Day where we brought in students to apply for their absentee ballots because students say, well, I'm already registered, but if you're not at home on November 6th or so that's what we're hoping the library can have some enthusiasm for the students. And we 1,000 students came through the library to get their absentee ballot, but that means how many do we miss? 15,000? So anyway, that's what the library is doing as far as civic.
Yeah, and I'm so excited that we have such a diversity already of people and folks and backgrounds represented. I think we'll definitely touch on your work, especially as we talk through storytelling and the impact that that has in building community and civic engagement in our population. Okay, others? Yes.
So I'm Anne-Marie Regan, and I'm adjunct faculty in the School of Public Affairs. I teach in the graduate program of organization development, the second to last course, and it's an integration course around implementing system change. So we look at large, complex systems. I've always worked in large systems, United Technologies, UNC Chapel Hill, and now Walter Reed National Military Medical Center as an interim OD person. And so my engagement efforts around the student population includes having clients connect with student teams, and then so they've got some assignments to do in between the two, because we teach in the 3-day weekend, which was last weekend, and the second half of the course is February 1st. And so they're going to be doing a lot of engagement with some client systems, which is real work, and there's a few other things, and then I bring people into either by Skype or Zoom or in person to be able to interact.
Oh, great. Very exciting.
I'm Jolyn Gardner, and I'm faculty in the Department of Health Studies with Celeste. And I teach our public health capstone class, which is for our graduating seniors. And in that class, we partner with community organizations to accomplish projects. And so I always want to convey to our students that this is part professional development, obviously, but even more so, it's an opportunity to engage with our community partners and give back to them and help them accomplish their goals and hopefully inform their work.
Yep. Great. Others? Yes.
My name is Andrew. I come here as a community partner. I actually work as a mentorship organization, Ward 7, for young men of color. And so we work with students of all ages, but our most civically engaged are high schoolers who actually helped lead the push this year to try to lower the voting age in DC to 16.
Yep.
That is still an ongoing fight that our guys are working hard on. They just had a town hall yesterday.
Oh, great.
Very excited to bring some. I know this is going to be mostly college student focused, but I'm going to translate some of this to our younger ages.
Yes. And when I share a little bit about my background, I think this is a perfect place for you to be. So don't. This is applicable to many kind of populations. All right, others. Anyone else?
Hi everybody, I'm Marcy Campos, and I'm the director of our Center for Community Engagement and Service. The whole role of my life is to get students learning out in the community, often connected to your classes. So I would love to talk to a bunch of you about the options for having community-based learning classes like Jolyn spoke about. But I also teach a course called the Latino Community of the DC metropolitan area. So the whole fall, we're following the so-called immigration debate and getting students engaged. And for me, it's partly the participation and being part of a nonprofit and seeing things on the ground. But it's also trying to understand, students need to read the news or watch the news to understand. And to me, you can't be informed unless you're also following what, all the stuff that was going on with the caravan and with our so-called president and all that.
Yeah.
So to me, like, this is so relevant because you have some people who have that as like a passion.
Yeah.
So they're going to jump in, and other people, are kind of watching it happen. But to me, engagement is like, it's so much like you said, Celeste, like I'm also have an activist background, so to me it's like, how can you not be upset about this or watching this?
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to my kind of self-identified activists in the room to kind of ask you all why, what did you start from in terms of your engagement in different kind of movements. All right, who is next? I'm sorry. I think it was you.
I'm Jessica Marcy. I'm actually an MFA student in the communications department in film. I guess I'm not interacting with a lot of students besides like my fellow students, except I have been teaching yoga at a detention center to unaccompanied minors who are being held here. So that has been how I've been teaching recently. For me, engagement, I think about like using film as a way to open people's eyes and connect people and show the human impact of different issues.
Yes.
And I think engagement just means having a personal relationship on a topic or with other people.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Very nice.
Okay. My name is Amin. I teach at the economics department, mostly macroeconomy and development economics. My population of my students usually undergrads and graduate students as well. So at all different levels of education and background. So engage for me really means how to be able to translate those economic theories we learn in class into real world policies, and also highlight and raise awareness about some issues that our politicians are talking about, and thinking and people thinking that they are trying to promote their objectives with minimum wage laws, with unionization laws, with trade wars and so forth that we are seeing right now, and try to basically dismantle those policies and see that is it actually helping the economy and the people who are supposed to help, or is it actually for the special interest of a certain group of people that those policies are being put forward with the name of helping the main street, basically. As we see, for example, in the trade wars with China, it was supposed to help the American manufacturing or the blue-collar segment of the economy, but it has actually hurt them more than helping them. So those are the issues that I try to discuss in class with the students and try to raise awareness about policies.
As you're talking, I'm trying to think if it's, it may be on the same level or maybe a little bit more difficult as coming from economics to kind of get your students and get people to see the practical kind of implications of different economic policies. And so I think, we'll definitely have things for you to take away from our session today.
And recently, I just found as a program for my activist friends here. So I was in El Paso visiting my wife's grandmother. She lives in El Paso. She's a Mexican. And so we were there at Christmas Eve, and that was the time that the ICE, they dumped 1,600 basically immigrants from the shelters right into the streets of El Paso with no shelter, nothing. And and when I come back, I saw it in the El Paso newspaper, but I was looking at other newspapers in the country, the bigger ones. You don't hear about it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So 1,600 people were just overnight. They bussed them into El Paso from the shelters, and the argument was that there wasn't enough judges to look into their cases, so they were in detention or shelter for 2 months, and they were running out of funds. So we just had to get rid of them, and the only solution they could come up with is to just bus them to the city and just drop them aside.
Wow. So at that point, it becomes how do you communicate that to others? How do you share that information? How do you engage, your peer groups or people in that community as well? Yeah, I think we're you next.
Good morning. My name is April McClay, and I am a new staff member in alumni relations. So I get the opportunity to work on the student side. So I get to plan events and opportunities for our students, and then kind of play matchmaker between our students and our alumni, engaging them back on campus, giving our students opportunities to meet with alumni that are like here in DC if they're interested in that, and then also around the country and the world. And for me, engage. I was thinking engage. I was thinking about mindfulness, just being like present in the moment, and taking advantage of like the situation that you're in right now. And just excited to be a part of this conference and be in a session to hear how you guys are all engaging your students in your different capacities, so that I can support that and the events that we're doing on campus, and I have understanding, you know, when they're coming to the quad to get free cupcakes, like from me, right? Like, where are they coming from? What are the experiences that they just had with them?
Great. Yes.
I'm at the School of International Service, and I work mostly with the grad programs. I'm the director of experiential learning there, so we work at particularly with a lot of client-focused projects, and I realize we're doing a lot of engagement of alums as clients now because they went through our program and now they're working with the State Department or something. I also have a freshman class that I retired and went to volunteer at a local nonprofit, so that they can understand more about the mission. And in terms of what I see engagement, I'd say that both parties are getting something out of it. It's not just a one-way street.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I'll come back to that. Did you want to go?
Sure. I have to take a minute from all that you just shared about the border and everything that's happening there. It's just, really, really upsetting. My name is Barbara Wien, and I teach alternatives to war and violence, and I come out of nonviolent movements, and I do nonviolent protective accompaniment in war zones as an unarmed bodyguard for human rights, primarily with Peace Brigades International, but increasingly here in the city. I have, literally hundreds of undergrads across all my classes, and I teach gender and peace building, global security, conflict resolution. I've been at it since 1977, and I do bring to my classes a lot of hope, a lot of experience, a lot of inspiration that things can change, but I don't want to assume that my students are where I am. So engagement for me is to try to be responsive to openings that they request, and to hear them out and see what they'd like to do and be elicitive. And so last semester, they were so distraught and full of despair about the immigration debate, so I provided an opening for them to organize a huge teach-in, and I wish I had invited you to be an expert. So it was very powerful, and we invited all the immigration advocacy groups, and it went on for almost 4 hours, and there was storytelling, and so wherever they wish to really engage, I try to provide the space, the opportunity, the resources, the experts, and not just voiced my passions on them. So working with lots of different populations, international students, lots of folks. Anyway, I came to this session because of your reputation. I've heard so much about you in the law school, and I really wanted to see you in action.
Great, thank
Sorry
you.
to go on so long.
No, thank you for saying that. It's very kind. Thank you. Okay, and then did you want to just introduce yourself, kind of your role at AU? Do you interact with a population of students or community here, and then what does engage mean to you?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Erica Garnett. I'm the Assistant Director for Orientation, Transition, and Retention. So just coming off the January orientation yesterday. So I interact with first-year students, transfer students, and their parents and families, along with a group of orientation leaders and orientation chairs. So sort of a spread of developmental needs. For me, engagement means plugging in and kind of getting folks connected with important resources or helping them figure out what they want to connect with, how they connect with business.
Great. All right. Well, I hope you all are as excited as I am to be here in this room with all of you all today. So I'll share a little bit of who I am, but I first want to touch base on what Celeste mentioned earlier around pedagogy, how we think of pedagogy. And so the title of this presentation is Pedagogy of the Engaged. And I really pulled that from Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which people are nodding their heads. Yes, they understand. And so when I said at the beginning, I'm not here representing, trying to be an expert. You all are the experts, right? We're on that kind of field, even playing field together. And I'm much more of a facilitator. Right, so I want to draw out the experiences that each one of you have already experienced, right, as experts in your particular field in your lives on how we can engage better our students and people we interact with. Also, Bell Hooks, who is a fantastic feminist scholar, also wrote about pedagogy of engagement. And so I pull a lot of that from our conversation today from their works. So my name is Lisa Curtis. I actually started my career as a 10th and 11th grade teacher in Charlotte, North Carolina. I taught U.S. history and civics and economics. So that was really the first time where I had to learn how to engage people in a topic that they might not want to be engaged in, right? Or they may not know a lot of information about. So that gives you a little bit of context as to where I kind of first got my first learnings on how to get that done. I actually graduated from the Washington College of Law almost 10 years ago now, and I started my career working with homeless families here in DC and nationally at the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. I've worked for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, mainly on education and domestic violence issues. And now I direct the Marshall Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project at the Washington College of Law. I teach a constitutional law seminar, and I work mainly with second and third year law students. But this is important because this, the context of Marshall Brennan is really the launch pad for our discussion today. So Marshall Brennan is a project where we take our law students and they teach constitutional law, youth justice, civics action to high school students. So we have a chapter here in Washington, D.C. We also have 18 chapters across the country where law students kind of in law schools follow this similar model. So I'll be talking from the standpoint of how to get my law students engaged and aware of what's happening in their community so that they can then also go on and teach other people, high school students, how to, learn how to build their skill set and become engaged in the community. Okay? So, high quality education. First, let me just get a few responses. When I say high quality education, what do you all think of? What comes to mind?
Good professors, access to resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Programs that teach students how to think and evaluate.
Mm-hmm. Think, evaluate.
Diversity of thought.
Yeah.
Social and emotional learning, empathy.
Huge. Yep, any other thoughts? So how many have heard of the Brown Center report or the Brown Center? They do a lot of research around education. It's mostly focused on K through 12 population, but I brought them up because they do a lot of reporting on how to engage students. So I actually have a copy of their latest report up here. I'll send along, if I can, the link because this is accessible online. But their 2018 report focuses on civics education, right? And what that means and how to provide quality education for those students. And so can somebody read this? What's it read for me? Marcy?
Are schools equipping students with the tools to become engaged, informed, and compassionate citizens?
Right, so picking up on what each of you all said, social, emotional. Are they compassionate, right? Engaged, informed. Do they know how to use their analytical skills, right? We're talking about media literacy and things like that. Do our students know how to read information and take in what's real, what's fake news? Right, what pertains to their lives or not. So this is the main question that we want to answer.
Can I just?
Yes.
I also think that the critical word there is citizen.
Yes.
That we all have a responsibility if we want to live in a civilization that we have to give back.
Yeah, take that upon ourselves, exactly. So within that, the report, they picked up on the following things that lead to a high quality or benchmarks of a high quality education as it pertains to civics, okay? Discussion of current events, news media literacy, talked about social emotional learning, right? And then I have bolded service learning and simulations. As you all are reading through this list, right, in terms of the factors or the identifying benchmarks of a high quality civics education, what are some thoughts, feedback, responses? Does this make sense? Do you think there's anything that needs to be added, Marcy?
Yeah. Well, I think looking at, and this might apply to all generations, but certainly the current generations, I think because of social media and a variety of things happening, I think the hands-on learning is really important, the applied learning. I don't think people are satisfied anymore to make it, all theory or all books or all, like you have to have multiple ways of learning. So I do think the service learning, or we often call it community-based learning, is so important because it's a way of testing out the theory and then discussing and reflecting and talking about the current events. So yeah, I think that's critical, but I think it's very much part of a millennial education, and now I guess Generation Z, maybe they'll have some other theories about what helps people really retain what they're experiencing in the classroom.
Right. Yeah. Other thoughts? Sorry.
Actually, this is probably why I'm here, because when you teach language, especially language, in the situation we are in with immigration, it's everything about it, and actually I see this as a problem in our classes, that yes, we do teach the language, but once I just had to go a little bit over and send them out there, so this is the topic, or we have immigration, and I said, okay, extra credit or whatever I needed to do it, to send them out there, talk to people, and find out why exactly they are here. And you would be amazed to know how much they learn that they didn't know. They just take it for granted. Okay, people are here, or they can. Oh, I need to practice. And okay, just go outside, step outside the classroom, and you'll have every second person you could practice and learn about them, and then share the country why exactly these people are here. So I'm here to learn how, in any other different ways, I can send them there to know the community that they're living just next door, but they think they know, but they don't really know what's happening.
Yeah.
And make the learning process more interesting, because then they do everything. They learn, they use the language, they get the information, and then they get engaged and involved in everything that is happening here.
Yes, and let me just quickly say, so I will definitely, you will leave with practical things ideas that you can use in terms of maybe getting the students interested in learning the content that they have to learn, right? But I want to pick up on something that Marcy said, which is this changing generation that we have. And I also think it's a changing model of education that we haven't picked up on as an academic kind of community, right? Which is to say that our students, we don't really learn anymore from just having someone stand up here and lecture. We need to be interactive and engaging in the classroom with the material. But also, as you pointed out, bringing it outside of the classroom is so important. So we, as folks who are in academia, have to understand that and integrate that into the work that we do. But also, I think there's some training, maybe that needs to, or expectation setting that has to take place for students as well, right? That they're just not passive kind of learners of information, but they really have to engage in the material. And that's going to require them to take it outside of the classroom, get uncomfortable, make mistakes, not know the answers, all of those things, which I think students, especially law students, tend to have. They want to have everything kind of set out, and they know what's expected, and they just sit back. But they are really active learners, and so it's how do we draw that out of them? Yeah, great points. Yes.
I think something that I would add to this list is some type of cultural exchange Somehow that, because since most of our high schools are neighborhood-based, students tend to go to school only with people who are like them. And they might be perhaps racially different, but they're not really culturally different, I mean, economically different. So just because the way that our schools are designed, and I think students, I mean, we only know what we know, right? Everybody around lives in a house that is owned by their family. They don't understand the struggles that they're, like, some of our kids didn't even know that adult families lived in apartments. This was news to them when they got to junior high school.
That's fascinating.
So I don't know how you...
So let me go into the engagement, and I take your point. I think it's something that folks who are engaged with people, have to really think about, right? My husband, Donald Curtis, who used to work for Marcy, now runs his own nonprofit here in DC called Soul, but he works in Ward 7 primarily. And he focuses a lot on providing exposure for his students. Even with Marshall Brennan, right? How do we expose our students to things outside of their community? Maybe it's not even outside of their community. Maybe it's just a new idea, a way of thinking about themselves, right? Positioned in their community. And so I think, what you're talking about is really exposure. And that can take a number, that can fit into really any of these bullets, right? Discussion of current events, news media, making them more aware of what's happening in their world and how they fit into it. And we'll talk about that.
What strikes me about the list from the Brown Center is that they're assuming the teachers or the schools have the luxury to do these things. That they live in an information-rich environment, or that they have the time to do this. And so many schools are so understaffed and under-resourced, and it would be very, very challenging, for instance, for some of the teachers I know in really poor areas of the U.S. to try and meet these goals. So there's kind of a class bias in what I'm seeing here. As much as I completely embrace it, and I'm coming from a position of privilege, so we can do all these things, but some places they don't even have the internet, and they don't have small town newspapers. They can't really keep up with the media. And I've been to those places, and you're like, oh my God, the voting rates are so low because people don't even know what the issues are. And the schools don't have any money because they've defunded public education across the country.
I take your point. I definitely think there's a certain level of privilege that's kind of assumed in this. But with that said, I do think that, I've given this presentation before in front of public school educators, and they talk about a lot of the limitations in terms of, the different benchmarks that they have to meet, standards that they have to meet for their kids, and how do we integrate service learning and all this. We have to really teach to a test, right? But I think that there are ways that you can, even from where you are, even if, let's say, you're teaching in the Mississippi Delta, right, where you don't have a lot of resources around you. Just about everyone has, at this point, has some kind of access to social media or things of that nature, right? So it's taking in what you do have available and using it in a new way to engage, your students in the population. But I think that's a fair point and kind of consideration to keep in mind. So I came up with this kind of model of engagement, kind of a checklist that you can use, right, as you're seeking to engage people. I'm obviously coming from the standpoint of students, but I think that this is applicable in any situation. So E, enchant with storytelling. Right, and this isn't, you don't have to go in any kind of order, but I think it's really important to tell the story of the issue or the content that you're seeking to communicate, right? That also goes with giving context. So where does this, we're talking about maybe recent economic policy, let's say, and how that, the trade wars with China and how that, impacts people, right? You're going to want to give the story, the context, whether that's a single person story, right? Or whether it's a whole community story about how, what jobs they need. What does it feel like to live in a community, right, that's made up of folks who work in manufacturing and really depend upon, our trading with other countries, right? You want to tell that story about why the information matters, okay? And nexus development. So we've already been talking about that, but it's really just connecting the dots. So you talk about what's happening in current events, let's say, and your student's like, okay, that's great. Yeah, that's really sad that everything happened in El Paso, but like, why does that matter for me? Right? It's our jobs as educators and as folks who are working to mobilize others to connect the dots for them. All right. So for you, in terms of your Spanish students, here's why you need to go out and not just communicate with me or folks in this room, but you have to go out and talk to real people, because you're going to get a sense of different accents, different dialects that are within the language, maybe the speed of the language, the different nuances that you don't pick up in the classroom, right? So you have to really connect those dots for your students. Obviously, we want to be giving them information, practical, useful information. And so that's where our teaching, background comes into play, right? Planning those lesson plans, really thinking through what is the point A, where your starting point of your students, and point B, where do you want them to get to? And what information do you need to give them? A, I think this is so important. Affirm lived experience. So for me, what that means is everyone is an expert, right, about their lived experience. This is what we talked about before in terms of I am not the teacher in the way of like I'm going to tell you and you have to listen and take what I say as the truth. But as we are engaged in a conversation around learning in a certain specific area, I am a facilitator, right? And so your students have to take on that active learning. And it's easy to activate that when you are able to affirm their expertise, right, and empower them in the classroom. And we'll talk about different ways that you can affirm that. G, galvanize action. That's why we're all here today. How do we engage our student population? And then E, empower the student voice, right? And so that goes back to kind of affirm lived experience. But you want to give them the power, help them to feel empowered about engaging with the material, asking questions, giving their own kind of opinions about what's happening. So what I'm going to do now is kind of take us through very quickly something that I do in my classes. Okay, I am a law professor. I work with students who teach law, and so everyone, for the most part, knows the First Amendment. Okay, so let's start from this point. What do you think of when you hear free speech? Free speech, what does that mean? What do you think?
The opportunity and ability to express your opinion.
Okay, expressing your opinions.
Without fear.
Without fear. Yep. Anything else? No.
Power of the press.
Power of the press. Power, right? Very strong word. Okay, so power to express your opinions without fear. Love it. Okay, can somebody read what the First Amendment says? We'll just go through a few slides. Yeah.
Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances.
Thank you. Okay, so what? What was that? What does that mean? Right? There's a whole lot of words that, we know how to articulate. Grievances, petition the government, peaceably assemble, abridging the freedom of speech. What the heck does that mean? What does it mean? Can somebody put that in their own words? What are the free speech rights?
Freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, but not hate speech.
That's a tricky area.
And to worship as you wish.
Yeah, religion, right? And so what we just did, thank you all for playing along with it, but started from a point, right, where it wasn't what's First Amendment, tell me exactly what the First Amendment means, right? But starting at a place that your students would already be at, or the people that you're interacting with already have kind of a foundational knowledge about, right? So I don't know what it would be for economics or for language learning or film or other things, but you all know, right? What is something that everybody in the general population knows? Language, right? That they know, that's accessible. And having them start to tap into their lived experience, their expertise. Then you go into, okay, here's the content. Even though it has all those words from long, long ago, we don't really talk like this anymore, we still need to know this, right? We still need to know what's contained in here. So giving them that information. And then again, asking them, okay, let's rephrase that into something that you want sticky, that you'll be able to remember, that you'll be able to maybe emotionally connect with, right? What do those words really mean? So it's constantly getting them to analyze and to ask questions and to engage with the material. It's not just giving them the First Amendment, saying remember this, or whatever the content might be. Okay? Then you would go into other questions. This could be discussion based. I love to do this with my students, which I have them actually break into groups. I'll assign one group one question, another group another question, and they have to get up and teach other people the material. So this is a great time to do something like that. Does it impact students? And then let's get into some storytelling. Does anybody know who this is? Well, I have the
Yeah.
Yep, Marcy?
So that Mary Beth Tinker in right? 19,
Yes.
maybe 68 or 70 or something.
Yeah.
Once she and maybe her brother wore black armbands to school. And I think they might have been suspended, I'm not sure. But it went to the Supreme Court that do students have the right of freedom of protest or freedom of expression?
Yep, exactly.
But I do have to tell a really, can I add a really funny story?
Yes, please do.
She lives in the D.C. area.
She does.
And this was a very famous case a long time ago. So most people don't know about it, but because of some work I did in college, I was very familiar with her name. So she told us that she came and spoke at AU's campus a year ago, and she works in the emergency room of a hospital, and she was treating some young person who came in and saw her name badge, and looked at her and said, "Wow, your name sounds really, really familiar. I think I might have studied you in school, but who are you?" And she said, "I'm the Supreme Court case."
Yeah, and Mary Beth is she actually now full-time works with students and getting them engaged in this work, student protest work. She's worked with the Vote 16 DC students. She's worked with the Students for March for Our Lives. She's a fantastic advocate. And I know we're running short on time. I hope you guys don't mind if we run just a few minutes over, but I want to make sure that we can at least touch on some of the information. So tell the story. Show a picture. Don't be afraid. Show a picture. Do a video, right? I have a link to an interview that Mary Beth gave to some folks. There's audio on what her kind of journey has been, why she decided to speak up in high school against the Vietnam War in the way that she did, right? So I use this all the time. I show videos, I show stories, I have them listen to NPR, real things from real people. If you can find audio or pictures or film that really represents the population of people, right, that you are speaking with, even better, right? Because what we want to do is have folks to see themselves, right, in the work, see themselves participating in civic action, right, and what that looks like, whether it's young people, African American people, new immigrants to our country, right? We want them to be able to see themselves. Yes.
Real quickly, the library has a fantastic collection of primary source materials. So if you're using any of these things with your class, check with our media services.
Yeah.
Fabulous collection.
Yes.
Wasn't this case invoked with a student who wore an LGBTQ T-shirt a couple years ago? They were banned from the school. It's a bunch of cases came up, right?
Yes.
And it's found that students' speech is federally protected in the schools, right?
Yes, but it's not uninhibited free speech rights, right? So it's balanced against the school's interest of maintaining a safe school environment and what their role is as educators. But Tinker was really pivotal Supreme Court case because it said that students have First Amendment rights in schools. And so there's different ways, there's different scenarios that you can have to have a twist on it. So then you would give the test. What does it mean? What does the case mean? Setting context for your students. Okay? And then asking them, like you were just mentioning, how do you take that where she wore an armband and the court said, yes, students have First Amendment rights. How does that apply to dress codes? Right? How does it apply to something that people experience, something fairly mundane that people experience every day? Right? So think about it. Here we're connecting the dots again. Right? How does this high-level thing pertain to me in my life where I am right now? So for us and our high school students, it comes down to dress code. They all have very strong opinions about dress code. Does your school have the right to tell you what to wear? Is it constitutional? Right? You come up with the scenario. So if you are wanting to have more engagement in the classroom, right, or even outside of the classroom, it's really important to model what that might look like inside of the classroom. Because a lot of our students or folks that we're interacting with may not have ever done something like testified before the council, right, or attended a protest. Right, so you want to give them a safe space where they can simulate that and learn, right, different strategies inside of the classroom. So this is something that I did for First Amendment. All right, and then the last part that I'll just touch on is just having your students learn, or the folks that you're interacting with, how to articulate themselves and their beliefs. Really important. So this is something that is always popular. It's like a no-fail strategy that you can use. And it's having students get up, move, right? One side of the room, you go to one side of the room if you believe, yes, this is constitutional, or whatever it may be. No, if you don't think it's or if it's unconstitutional, right? And then explain yourselves. So you come up with T-shirts. So for this First Amendment dress code we're talking about here, different logos. Is this okay for a high school student to wear? Can the school say they can't wear this, right? And then you get into it. Okay, if you think that it's okay for a student to wear this, go to this side of the room. If not, and you talk about that. It gets progressively maybe more controversial, okay? This. What about this? Right? Something we're dealing with in current events in our society. Right, we have, for my law students, because I know them and I'm able to it's important when you're doing stuff like this, though, you want to be able to get an emotional response from your students, but you don't want to take it so far that folks are triggered.
That's the balance.
Right? And so this kind of activity I would not do on a first day, and some of the things that we, T-shirt designs that we have had have, gone a little further than this. Right, but it's because I know my students and I know their background and context, but it's really important to give that warning beforehand and to know who you're working with.
And also to know some context of the symbol. We had for our Explore DC program an image of Explore DC, and we had a black T-shirt with a white fist, and then we had a white T-shirt with a black fist. What someone researched and told us is that the white supremacist movement has that white fist, that's their symbol. We had no idea, but that triggered and got a lot of people very upset with us, and we just didn't have that background. So it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so do as much research as you can, but understanding that if we're engaging in this work, right, there may be times when people are triggered, of no kind of intentional doing or, neglect on your part. And I would say don't be afraid to engage in those conversations for fear of that, but it's on how you respond to that, right? And providing that safe space, really letting people know that, hey, we're going to be talking about controversial issues or what have you, sensitive issues today. If you feel like you need to step out of the room, let me know. If you're offended by something, speak up. Let me know. You can come up to me. You can share, right? But giving different opportunities for people to speak into, this is going too far for me, or not, because that's how we learn, right?
I know this is a huge, big topic. I'm just so when you have these logos and things, the only sort of conservative one you put up there was the American Great. I mean, like a swastika or something. Like, would that or do you think that's too trigger?
No, I mean I've used it before. Because I didn't necessarily know you all today, I didn't want to go too far in that.
but it proves the point of
exactly.
A lot of people, most people I'd say, are really offended by that.
Right.
But that's why it's such a good thing to talk about,
mm-hmm.
right? So, I don't know. I mean, how do you...
Yeah, I think, that really ties into what your personal judgment is, with the caveat that I think it's always important to touch base, to know your audience and know the people that you're working with first, and not to do anything that's controversial just for the sake of it, right? Because sometimes you can get the point across with doing something less highly charged, right? So sometimes you need to go there because maybe you've had conversations with your population of individuals before, and you can talk about the swastika or anti-Semitism or what have you, right? You know that you can do that.
And why shouldn't we talk about anti-Semitism with
No, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that you have to balance that between people being offended. And a lot of times with engagement, it comes down to, have you built enough, I guess the before engagement is building trust, right, with your students or the people that you're working with, letting them know that you're coming, what place you're coming from, hear what your intentions are, that you care about them and their story, and that you want them to be impactful and successful, right? That has to happen before any of this stuff happens. And in that process, you'll learn, right, what is triggering, what is taking it too far for somebody, that it's uncomfortable. And I guess you would have to kind of determine for yourself, are you okay with making somebody really uncomfortable or offending somebody? What
are the cases that you decided not? I mean, what are, you said.
So we've done the swastika. We've had I had a vegan shirt on here, and that was actually a different shirt where you saw an animal actually who has been. I mean, they've been very vivid pictures because of just the level of where my law students were. I don't know if I would necessarily have that in a high school classroom because that lends itself to different kind of situations. So you have to think about the age of your students that you're dealing with. But you work with master's level students.
Oh, I freshmen.
Oh, and freshmen. Yeah, so I think it's just having that conversation with them and maybe testing the boundaries of what they're able to receive, because you also don't want people to shut down, disengage from the process, right? Because it's just too much for them in that moment.
And a swastika
could be.
Do that.
Yeah. It could be so many different things. I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes, especially in my law school classes, this could be too much, right? Because they feel like, oh my God, I can't really speak up because we are on a liberal campus. I don't want anybody to, right? So it's hard to even tell what is and what isn't gonna, get that kind of reaction.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
You answered it.
Okay. Okay, so galvanizing action. So really, what does this look like? What is the linchpin? So you've done all the work inside of the classroom. How do you get your students outside of that classroom to engage, right? So giving them opportunities. I love this. I think this is definitely an outdated term, service learning, but I love community-based learning. So are there opportunities, are there resources within the community that it doesn't even necessarily require a lot on your part besides research, right? Is this a good group to connect with? or community, but putting it on your students. Like, you have the charge of doing research and figuring out what would be the best use of your time, where you could learn the most about this specific issue. Okay, giving them the opportunity to do that. And then we talked about this. Simulations, I think, are just so key. If you can create an opportunity project, right, in your class where your students have to take what you've been learning all semester and actually do a legislative hearing, right, in different roles, or do, become a member of an economic task force, right? What would you actually do? As much training as you can give them for real life situations, the better. Right? And then that's going to get them to activate, okay, I really need to know this information. I really need to integrate it and internalize the information, right, that I'm learning. So this is some ideas that I had in terms of civics. So writing a letter to your local government agency, running for office, you can do that in your classroom. Okay, testifying before a government agency, moot court, mock trial simulation, or have your students create an advocacy group, advocacy plan. Some of our high school students around environmental justice have really done that, around prisoner rights, have done that, have engaged with different, people in the community, have really thought thoughtfully about this as if it is something that can make a difference, right, in the community. Not something like, well, we're going to do this as a project, but no, we're really going to put this out there, right, to be impactful. And it's this safe environment that kind of lends itself, right, of the academic space that lends itself to that kind of work.
Can I just comment?
Yeah.
In some of my courses where they have gone out and partnered with community groups, we then also tried to convene the community groups together. Yeah. The underlying rationale being that we're greater than the sum of our parts. To solve problems in the community, we need coalition building. Now, of course, coalitions are incredibly hard to maintain and nurture, but just the act of convening so many advocacy groups that might not already know each other was very, very powerful. Yeah. So it was called Localizing Peace, and we actually had a special grant for it, but my students got to go out and interview the nonprofits. What are the challenges that you face? Where could we help harness the resources of higher education to strengthen your operations? But most importantly, we brought them all together, and that was so powerful. Yeah, it was so much work.
Yeah, it's a lot. And this work, it is a lot of work. If you're invested, right, and passionate about it, it is a lot of work connecting with people, right? But I think the dividends really pay off, right, in the end. And so, setting those expectations up front. This is not an in and out kind of thing. It's a process of building a relationship. Yeah. Essentially, is what it is. And thank you for bringing up that point. We talked about it's not a one-way street in the classroom with your students or in the meeting or what have you, training. Same thing outside of the community, right? As they're engaging, it's always this back and forth. It's a symbiotic relationship where people are always engaging and getting new information from one another. And so it's important to know that even if you're an activist and you want to help a certain community or an advocate, like you have to listen to the community, understand the community, right? It's always this back and forth relationship. All right. So, I know we're like way over. I think you have 4 minutes until you're...
Class starts at 11.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's debrief then. We have plenty of time to debrief. So, I have a few questions to get us started, but really anywhere that folks kind of want to start, or if you want me to go back and kind of touch on anything, I'm happy to do so. But in terms of those key takeaways, have there been things maybe that folks would want to highlight that you would be able to integrate in your classroom or in the group of folks that you work with?
I teach one of the core classes, like I said, the Food Justice Matters class, and so the students are straight from high school, first semester of college, trying to figure it all out. And it's a class of all first-year students. And so for them, usually I've had classes where it's mixed levels of classes, so the younger students kind of lean on the older students for permission, but because I was giving them permission to be engaged, and they were really nervous about it, like, we can really do this, tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, you figure it out. So one of the projects, we have a service learning project where they do a volunteer project. And so they're like, where are we supposed to volunteer? And you can pick it, and I'll let you know if it's okay or not, but I want you to like just go down a rabbit hole and find an organization that speaks to you. So just really starting to then, instead of just giving them the assignments, I had to learn, I had to break it down. I had to make a class time to walk them through and again, continue to give them that permission that it's okay to do this, for constant feedback for those questions because they were very, very nervous about it. And then the second project that we do is they pick which way that they want to do an advocacy type of thing. So one group can do an advocacy, they can create an advocacy group. The next one did like a journalism for justice project, and they end up doing like a mini documentary asking folks on campus about some experiences on food justice and food insecurity. Another group created a PSA, so they all can do different things. And what I actually did was to create community was I brought back all the invited speakers that we had to class to come see their final presentations, and that just helped them feel like, okay, I'm actually becoming a part of this like food justice community. But that really worked well, and of course the community advocates loved coming back and seeing how involved the students were and what their ideas were. So those things actually worked really, really well. But I think making space to mentor the students through this process was probably the biggest thing that I got from doing that.
Yeah, and I think the payoff from that is huge, not only for your class and what is expected there, but just life skills.
Yes.
Like you need to know, if you think that something should change, you need to know how to be proactive and make that thing happen. But oftentimes it's our classrooms where they get to test that out and try it and learn. But yeah, that sounds fantastic. Yes.
I just don't want to sound too much like an advertisement, but I do encourage each one of you to send your students to the library because we have all kinds of equipment, tripods, videos, everything that you want your students to make. We have it all that they can just check out, GoPros, and also we have this amazing collection of primary source material. Amazing that we have the whole social justice primary collections in our special collections. So, you know, if they need a list of advocacy groups and they don't know how to Google it, send them to us because we can. I did the DC history, we've got subject guides on how to do all this. So.
Just to interrupt, maybe it would be good to ask CTRL to host like
I was going to say that.
a lunchtime session about how to utilize the library to promote social justice.
Do they? They're all the time.
Because all of the classes are from 11 to 2. I never get to I keep emailing them and saying, please offer a session like at 7 or 8. Like, I would call them. But I teach, you know, in this 8-week
library offers some
Well, you know, we have under our services for faculty. You can ask to have a librarian come to your class.
Yes, I have.
You just tell the librarian what you want to highlight for your students, and the librarian can show you. Because there's no way, we have over 600 databases, and every day I'm finding ones that I don't know about.
Do you have StoryCorps from NPR? StoryCorps? Because it's lodged at the Library of Congress and you cannot get into it. Oh my gosh, it's so confusing. I tried it.
I thought
StoryCorps is so good. Washington Post just did an article on it. My big takeaway from this session with you, thank you so much. It was very, very skillfully delivered. Thank you. Is that I need to be as open-ended as you are in my inquiry. You're so open in fostering their own critical thinking first, and you're not spoon-feeding them information. So that's my big takeaway from you, that you're asking them to analyze and engage and ask what does it really mean for them, where is it being applied, and I need to do more of that. So that was very, very important for me to hear from you.
Good. And I think on that point, you know, it's the onus should really be on the student. Right? And not being afraid to give them that charge. Right?
And also that if we want them to be powerful citizens in a democracy, we have to model democracy.
Yes.
And I see that you're doing that when you said at the very beginning, give away your power.
Yes.
That's huge, because then they know they have power.
Yes.
And, it's not a top-down method of learning, and also they're supposed to take that model out into society.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because too much power in the hands of too few people right now.
Yeah. And I think I want to go back to Celeste's comment too. I think there is a lot of like development of our own students and even of ourselves, right? To break out of that like model of communication and interaction with other people, and say, if I'm in a room, right, I'm going to speak up.
Right.
People are going to know that I'm here and what I have to say about something. I'm going to listen, right? I'm going to seek to understand first, but I'm also going to speak up and share what I know, no matter what room I'm in.
And I see a huge difference in the level that we teach. So freshmen and sophomores are much more difficult to draw out and to get them to kind of challenge each other and to challenge themselves in terms of their thinking. Whereas my juniors, seniors, and grad students, they're super fun to engage.
Yeah.
They speak up. They have a lot of opinions. But when you're teaching, 100 or 200 level class, I find I've seen a tremendous difference.
Yeah, and it's and I'm gonna sorry.
so connected.
Yeah.
Do you have because even in 300 levels, I find myself so often to be the bad guy, because I see the topics, we do discuss them, and at some points it comes that I feel, okay, they just won't say it. So, okay guys, I will say whatever you don't want to say out loud, and it's not necessarily my opinion, because I want to debate, I want your opinion, I want a solution.
I do it
But things you
wait a minute. Just let the silence, like from Law and Order, let the silence.
I'm gonna.
Yeah. So they will. The silence will get so uncomfortable that and I will joke. I'll stand there and say, I will stand here and let the room be quiet until y'all speak.
But because we work with high school students, right, who might be more similar to the 100 or 200 students, or they're just the reluctant people who don't want to speak. And what we found is, if you give them, rather than putting out a question, let me see, what is a dress code? Is it constitutional, right? In a large group, having them partner up, right? That might be more comfortable for them. Or we'll do gallery walks where we'll post questions around the wall. Get up, walk, have a post-it. If something resonates with you, put a sticky by it. If you have a question about something else, put a sticky by it. So it doesn't have to be like a verbal engagement. It could be other ways that they can engage in the material that is more comfortable for them as you're kind of teaching them how to engage. We have to do a lot of teaching our high school students how to collaborate with one another, because they're kind of like toddlers in that they'll just sit there in the group and then they'll just be doing their own work, and it's like, well, you guys have to talk to each other, but you have to teach that, that really is a skill. Talking about social emotional, that's a skill. Think about other ways that you can get them to interact that's less, kind of intimidating for them.
I do hear more and more students say to me that they have social anxiety.
Yeah.
That's on the rise across the country, and they said, I can't speak in the full group, I have social anxiety. And so much of their grade is participation, so I had to come up with really creative ways for the painfully shy people to speak.
The index card.
Yeah, I did all that, journaling,
That's great.
and reflections. And their papers actually were the best papers in the class.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I was that student. I was that student who was just like, I'm just going to sit here because I want to know the right thing to say. So I'm just going to sit and keep my thoughts to myself. And it's really through, law school, to be honest with you, and teaching, that got me kind of to say, it's okay. And so sometimes it takes practice and just seeing what it feels like and working through that. So there's a whole host of things that you have to teach before you maybe, or that your students have to come in with before they can get to that point. Any other thoughts? And there are also online tools that you can use for engagement or just checking in with students. That if there's a conference portal or something, I'll link to it. so you all can see it. So you could have your students like vote on things.
Yeah,
and it
I'm
pops
really
up.
interested in that.
Yep. Okay. 5 minutes left. Yes.
So, Lisa, I really appreciate your model.
Thank you.
It's framed so beautifully.
Thank you.
And then taking us through the experience of how to use the model. So that's my big takeaway.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Another big takeaway is the incredible commitment and passion present with everybody here.
Yeah. It's really very beautiful. Yeah, very nice.
Just one thing that's still sticking with me.
Yes.
And that is our liberal bias on this, and I'm
Yeah.
so guilty.
Yeah.
Do you ever like assign topics to students, like make them discuss the red hat versus, like the Black Lives Matter? I mean, and to say to them that they must take this seriously and they must really try to put their own head with the red hat on?
Yeah.
How do you?
So we do that for our particular project. We do a moot court simulation each year with our students, and we come up with a whole court case. Right. Last year, we worked with a transgender student who wanted to use a certain bathroom, and the school said, "No, you can't use this bathroom." Right. And so, is the school being unconstitutional, or does the student not have a right to choose which bathroom? Right, and dress code violations there. So many of our high school students and our law students were like, we don't want to argue on behalf of the school. Like, we think this is wrong. But, for our field in law, you have to be able to be objective, and your role is to advocate for your client. And so it lends itself.
So you do kind of
this is the one. Yeah, and I think that's a good exercise. I think that's a great exercise to say you have to see the other person's viewpoint. Because something we don't do is know how to talk to one another, especially if we have differing opinions, right? So I think that's a great thing to be able to do at some point. You have to gauge your students and kind of, we talked about being the bad guy and all of that. Sometimes,
sometimes when
we
I
do
know
that.
for sure, like this particular student has this particular idea,
Yeah.
I want to change it. So no, you are defending the other idea,
Yeah.
so you have to see.
And why is that an important skill for you to have? Right? So I'm not doing it just to ruffle your feathers, but you need to know how to see somebody else's viewpoint, because that's where the truth is, right? The truth is somewhere in there.
They start convincing themselves, and they're so, oh my God, I didn't know this, because they have to do tiny research before they start talking about something, and they might just not know something.
And have them reflect. I didn't talk about this, but reflection also is really key. Like, what have you learned, right? What were your takeaways? We kind of did it with the debrief, but you have to advocate for this different viewpoint. How did you feel about that? What did you learn? What did you gain? What kind of skills, right? And talk about that. That's a really, really valuable tool of engagement. All right. Well, thank you all so much. It was so fun. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Let me put my email address up.
Are we going to